simplicity. And that's what I wanted to do in making this book. So let me start by reading a poem called The Pier, which I think springs out of my father's fascination with boats, and also his own experience. It's a little bit long, but it'll be okay. Hopefully you'll hang with it. This is called The Pier. This poem, there's a number of father poems in here. I'll read a couple of them. But this particular poem, I think, tries to both confront the relationship between working class father and son, but also sort of goes into the history of it. I'm Irish American by my history. When I started to do research, I did some research for my own family on this, and I asked my uncle, who's no longer with us, my Uncle Ed, who actually used to live not far from here, about 30 or 40 years ago. I said, "Where do we come from in Ireland?" He said, "County Cork. We were all horse thieves back then." So I come from a long line of horse thieves, apparently, and maybe some of that gets into the book. This is called The Pier, and this is a different uncle. It has an epigraph from Hart Crane Bridge, from the Brooklyn Bridge, and it's, "You are your father's father and the stream." That wild man soaring out over the narrows from the half-painted bridge, his length of rope an umbilical cord, is my crazy Uncle Alan, family Scot, teller of tall tales. It was the days before his stroke, and my father has driven our family the 40 miles from our house to the Jersey shore to see his older brother, the one born closest to him, the raconteur of Cliffwood Beach, whom he looked on with pride. In the story my uncle told that day, as we sat under the glow of patio lanterns, the bridge tower rose above him, sheer as a butte, while he lowered himself, ratcheting the rope down its side, the steel uncoated, opaque, then gleaming the blue-gray of a battleship where he wielded his deft brush. I still don't know if it was true. It's become a family legend, how he hung suspended on his own lifeline, tug after tug puttering below, the cargo boats, battered garbage scows bound for Red Hook or the Kilvan Cull, and among them now and then a liner steaming regally into the harbor, or out along the channel that widens into the Atlantic. My father loved that story. I could tell by his eyes, the satisfaction in his folded arms, while twilight fell in a bloom of citronella that made each face appear nearly rapt as my own. Like whenever my father unscrolled the paintings of the great ships, America, the United States, that he kept in the space behind his dresser. Why hadn't he framed them, hung them in the living room in place of the mirror that took up what seemed the entire wall? The boats were nearly twins, sleek bulkheads, stacks rising red, white, blue over decks and staterooms. The United States looked sleeker still, its stacks angled back with wings, only the faintest stroke of foam where the prow parted the waves. What I could almost see those times my father lifted them from their places were the living passengers whirling on the dance floor of a great ballroom, and deeper down, under decks, the steerage crowd playing cards or telling stories in an amber glare of light on cast iron. Now, further back, I can see shuttered on the fathomed ship that brought them here, my father's fathers, the tune of a tin whistle ghosting the hold, the whistler's fingers reeling over its zeros, while the dying shiver each alone in a dance of fever. St. John, stench of Lazar House, stunned hush of a remnant as bodies pile behind or drift picked clean under waves. And ahead, the work. Someone singing through the smoke haze and clatter of a bar. Someone spinning a story out over the abyss again. My father on the patio of his brother's house 30 years ago, youngest of 10, swaddled in his usual deferral. Al, you tell the story. As the conversation turns to Red Hook, their growing up, tales of a drunk father, of a good mother who served, the tired repetitions, the ancient history, floating like spindrift into shallows, recurrent dream that flexes my father's hands, his desire to speak broken by the fear of being outdone. Years later, both drunk, I sit with him alone, a hint of dawn catching the blinds. No one wanted me after my mother died, none of my brothers. And he says a name, John Harvey, the heel of his hand pressed tightly to his forehead. I was stationed in the Navy Yard. We were playing in the barracks with our new guns. His rhythm shudders. I shot him. We were only goddamn 17. My father plants his fist deeper into the space above his eyes and repeats the name over and over until it becomes a prayer. But here, the name lies empty as a hand traced on a wall, or the scrabbled effort of my uncle's speech as he lies in bed, his stories a clot of gutturals he wants us to decode, distorted mirror he hopes will get him true. In the poem my father never wrote, we stand together on a long pier. Beside us, unmoored, the sleeper ship backs free, an embodiment of grace into the flow. He has shown me everything, each deck and cabin, the ballroom with its murals and chandeliers, the great engines that hum to life, the huge wheel. Off-sounding, a long-held note as it eases into the harbor, writes itself to ride the current downstream into the narrows and under the flared suspension of the bridge, the river swallowing its weight. And my father leans close to tell me something. My father leans close to me, whispering.